What if I told you that one of gospel music's most recognized voices almost lost everything that mattered while standing on stages that held thousands? That the man whose baritone has moved millions to tears came dangerously close to becoming a stranger in his own home? And that the decision he made in 2009 wasn't about music at all, but about saving what he was about to lose forever? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about success, ministry, and what it really costs to stand in the spotlight. Guy Penrod's silver hair and commanding stage presence have become iconic in Southern gospel circles. But here's what most people miss. Behind every powerful performance, behind every homecoming event, behind every standing ovation, there was a man fighting a battle most celebrities refuse to acknowledge until it's too late. This isn't a story about perfection. This is about something far more powerful and far more real. Let me take you back to a moment that changed everything. Picture this: Guy Penrod, at the absolute peak of his career with the Gaither Vocal Band, one of the most beloved members of gospel music's premier group, walks into his own kitchen after weeks on the road. His children glance up, then back down at their activities. The conversation is polite but distant. And in that moment, Guy realizes something that would alter the trajectory of his entire life. He had become a guest in his own home, a visitor to his own family. The applause of thousands couldn't drown out the silence of that realization. But let's start from the beginning, because Guy's journey to that kitchen moment reveals something critical about the price of ministry that nobody talks about in the green rooms and tour buses. Born the 2nd of July, 1963, in Taylor, Texas, Guy grew up immersed in gospel tradition. This wasn't just Sunday morning music for him. This was the soundtrack of his entire childhood, the foundation of his worldview, the language his soul learned to speak. At Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, he didn't just study voice. He was preparing for something he believed was a divine calling, though he had no idea where that calling would lead or what it would eventually cost him. Now here's where the story gets interesting, and here's a lesson that every aspiring artist needs to understand. Before Guy Penrod became the Guy Penrod, he was grinding it out in Nashville studios, singing backup vocals for artists you absolutely know. Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, Garth Brooks. Think about that for a moment. He had one of the most distinctive baritone voices in the industry, and he was standing behind other people's microphones. But here's the critical insight. Those years weren't wasted. They were preparation. He was learning the craft, understanding the industry, building relationships, and most importantly, developing humility. That humility would become his anchor when fame arrived, and it would ultimately save him when fame threatened to destroy what mattered most. The early 1990 seconds brought the breakthrough. The Gaither Vocal Band needed a baritone, and Guy Penrod's voice was exactly what they were looking for. But it was more than just vocal ability. Bill Gaither saw something deeper, a genuine heart for ministry. A man who understood that the stage was meant to serve something greater than ego. For over 14 years, Guy became the face and voice of songs that defined a generation of gospel music. His renditions became legendary. His stage presence, that distinctive silver hair, the Western flair, the way he could hold a note and make time stop, all of it created an almost mythical figure in Southern gospel circles. But here's what you need to understand. And this is where the real story begins. Success in ministry creates a unique and dangerous paradox. The better you are at reaching people from the stage, the more time you spend away from the people who matter most. The more lives you touch on tour, the less you're present for the lives depending on you at home. And unlike corporate success, where you can rationalize the sacrifice as providing for your family, ministry success comes wrapped in spiritual justification. You're not just working, you're serving God. You're reaching souls. You're fulfilling a calling. How do you push back against that without feeling like you're pushing back against God Himself? Guy and Angie Penrod married in the 980 seconds, building a life rooted in deep Christian conviction. They didn't just have children, they built a vision for family that was countercultural and intentional. 8 children, all homeschooled, raised with biblical values at the center of everything. On paper, it looked like the model Christian family. The kind of family that gets featured in ministry magazines, the kind of family that other believers aspire to become. But here's the brutal truth that nobody mentions in those glossy profiles. Maintaining that vision while one parent is constantly traveling is exponentially harder than anyone admits. Angie Penrod became the invisible force, holding everything together. While Guy was on stage receiving applause, she was managing the daily chaos of 8 children's education, spiritual formation, emotional needs, and all the unexpected crises that come with a large family. She was making thousands of decisions alone, disciplining alone, celebrating small victories alone. And here's the part that creates the real tension. Guy was doing exactly what they both believed God had called him to do. There was no villain in this story, no affair, no scandal, no dramatic betrayal, just the slow erosion that happens when 2 people who love each other are living increasingly separate lives under the same roof. The gospel music community held up the Penrods as an example of what ministry marriage should look like: stable, faith-filled, unshakable. But those closest to the situation began noticing subtle signs. Guy's interviews started including more references to missing home. Angie appeared less frequently at public events. The carefully maintained image began showing hairline cracks, not because anyone was being dishonest, but because maintaining an image while your foundation is shifting requires enormous energy. And that energy has to come from somewhere. Here's a principle that applies whether you're in ministry, business, or any demanding career. Proximity creates relationship, and distance erodes it. It doesn't matter how good your intentions are. It doesn't matter how pure your motives are. If you're not present, you become peripheral. Guy began experiencing this firsthand. He'd come home with stories from the road, but his family had been living their own stories without him. Inside jokes he wasn't part of, decisions that had been made without his input, a rhythm of daily life that had learned to function in his absence. He was still the father, still the husband, but he was no longer central to the story his family was living. And here's where it gets really painful. Guy couldn't even be angry about it because Angie and the children had done nothing wrong. They had learned to thrive without waiting for him to be present. In a strange way, Angie's competence and strength made Guy's absence more sustainable, which meant the problem could continue longer before reaching a crisis point. The family could function, which meant the tours could continue, which meant the distance could grow, which meant the functioning had to become even more independent. It was a cycle that many ministry families recognize, but few talk about openly. The years between 2005 and 2009 were the pinnacle of Guy's career with the Gaither Vocal Band. Stadium events, international tours, recording projects, television specials. Everything an artist could dream of achieving. But something was shifting internally. Guy was having those quiet moments, alone in hotel rooms or sitting on tour buses at 2 a.m., where the questions you've been avoiding suddenly demand answers. What's the point of reaching thousands if you're losing 8? What does it mean to minister to families if your own family is learning to live without you? Can you really call it obedience to God if it's destroying what God calls sacred? These weren't hypothetical questions for Guy. They were becoming urgent. Sources close to the family, though never speaking publicly in detail, indicated that there were serious conversations happening behind closed doors. Not screaming matches, but harder. The quiet, painful conversations where both people are trying to do the right thing, but can't figure out what the right thing is. Where faith meets exhaustion. Where calling meets reality. Where the theoretical principles you've preached have to actually work in the crucible of your real life. Then came 2009, and Guy Penrod made a decision that shocked the gospel music world. At the height of his fame, at the peak of his influence, as arguably the most recognizable voice in the Gaither Vocal Band, he walked away, not from ministry, not from music, but from the machine that was consuming his life and threatening his family. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Speculation ran wild. Was there conflict with Bill Gaither? Financial disagreements? Hidden scandal? The truth was simultaneously more simple and more profound. Guy chose his family over his platform. Now, here's the critical lesson, and this applies whether you're in ministry or running a startup or building any kind of career. The willingness to walk away from success when success is costing too much is rare. Most people can't do it. The identity is too wrapped up in the achievement. The validation is too addictive. The fear of losing relevance is too powerful. Guy Penrod demonstrated something that looks like weakness in our culture, but is actually profound strength. He was willing to be less successful publicly, to be more faithful privately. He traded applause for presence, platform for parenting, recognition for relationship. His public statement was straightforward and honest. God was leading him toward solo ministry where he could control his schedule. His children were growing up fast, and he didn't want to miss it. And here's the line that reveals everything. Angie needed her husband to be more than just a stage pastor. That phrase is loaded with meaning. It acknowledges that Guy had been pastoring everyone except his own family, that his best self was being given to strangers while his family received whatever was left over, that the title of husband and father had remained, but the substance had eroded. The transition to solo work wasn't smooth. When you leave a premier platform like the Gaither Vocal Band, you don't just change jobs, you reconstruct your entire identity. Guy released his first solo album, Breathe Deep, in 2010, followed by others with more country influences. The reception was positive, but it wasn't the same level of exposure, and that was precisely the point. Guy was intentionally choosing a smaller stage so he could have a fuller life. He was redefining success not by audience size but by family health, not by album sales but by whether his children actually knew their father. But here's what makes Guy's story particularly compelling. He didn't just change his schedule. He changed his message. As his solo ministry developed, he began speaking more openly about the tensions between career and calling, about the specific challenges of ministry families, about the ways even good things can become destructive when they're out of balance. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't condemning the Gaither organization or the demands of touring. He was simply bearing witness to a truth that needed to be said. You can be successful in ministry and failing at life, and God cares about both. This is where Guy's theological convictions became even more important to his story. He has always held orthodox Christian beliefs, including conservative views on marriage, family structure, and biblical authority. Some critics have labeled these views as rigid or outdated, but for Guy, these convictions provided the framework for his difficult decision. If he genuinely believed that God designed the family with specific roles and responsibilities, and if he believed that fathers are called to be present and engaged, then his career success was actually evidence of disobedience, not blessing. His theology demanded a change that his ambition would have resisted. This created tension with some progressive voices in the industry who disagreed with Guy's theological positions. Online critics occasionally called him dogmatic or out of touch. But here's what's fascinating. Guy didn't soften his message to reduce criticism. Instead, he doubled down, becoming more vocal about biblical family structure, male leadership in the home, and traditional Christian sexual ethics. He once said, and this quote captures his entire approach, "I'm not here to be politically correct. I'm here to follow the Bible." Whether you agree with his theology or not, you have to respect the consistency. He wasn't preaching family values from a stage while neglecting his family. He was restructuring his entire life to align with what he claimed to believe. The years following his departure from the Gaither Vocal Band brought their own challenges. There were health scares that forced Guy to cancel performances and take extended breaks. Though he never disclosed specific diagnoses, he referenced ongoing issues that required rest and recovery. In 2020, during a period of medical leave, fans worried about his long-term health and career viability. But Guy framed these challenges differently. He saw them as opportunities to slow down, to pray, to hear from God again, and to spend concentrated time with Angie and the family. What looked like setbacks from the outside were experienced as invitations to deeper intimacy and healing on the inside. And here's a detail that reveals the depth of Guy and Angie's commitment. These quiet periods became times of marriage renewal. The distance that had developed over years of touring didn't disappear overnight. Rebuilding intimacy, relearning each other, renegotiating roles and expectations, all of this required time and intentionality. Many couples in their situation would have concluded that too much damage had been done, that they had grown too far apart, that it would be easier to start over with someone new. Guy and Angie chose the harder path of staying and rebuilding, not because it was easy, but because they had made covenant promises they intended to keep. Then came 2021 and a different kind of challenge. False rumors began circulating online that Guy and Angie were divorcing. Gossip blogs and low-quality YouTube channels started speculating about hidden drama and secret separation. The rumors were completely unfounded, but they spread quickly in a media environment that rewards scandal over truth. Friends of the family and gospel music insiders quickly debunked these claims, but the Penrods themselves chose silence. They didn't issue statements. They didn't address the rumors publicly. They simply continued living their lives with integrity, trusting that truth would eventually win out. This response reveals something profound about maturity. In our current culture, the default response to false accusations is immediate, aggressive rebuttal. Social media has trained us to defend ourselves instantly and publicly. But Guy and Angie demonstrated an older, wiser approach. They refused to let gossip dictate their actions. They understood that engaging with baseless rumors often gives those rumors more oxygen. They trusted their actual community, the people who knew them personally, and they let their lives speak louder than any statement could. This required tremendous self-control, especially when the rumors affected their children and extended family. But it also modeled for their children something crucial. You don't owe an explanation to everyone who demands one. Today, Guy Penrod continues in ministry, but on dramatically different terms than his Gaither years. He tours, but selectively. He performs at churches, conferences, and special events, but the pace is sustainable. The character of his performances has shifted as well. They're more devotional than entertaining, more about spiritual renewal than musical showcase. He frequently speaks about biblical manhood, family integrity, and the importance of authentic worship, topics drawn directly from his own journey. He's not performing a role. He's sharing from lived experience. Guy and Angie appear together more frequently now, both at events and on social media. Their older children, now young adults, are launching their own ventures, some in music, others in business. The investment Guy made by leaving the Gaither Vocal Band is bearing fruit in ways that can't be quantified by album sales or concert attendance. His children actually know their father. His marriage has been restored and strengthened. The platform is smaller, but the life is fuller. Here's the final insight, and this is why Guy Penrod's story matters for anyone wrestling with the tension between calling and family, between public success and private faithfulness. Guy discovered that the stage is not the ministry. The stage can be a tool for ministry, but if the stage requires you to fail at the primary ministry of family, then the stage has become an idol. This is a hard truth for anyone whose identity is wrapped up in their work. Whether that work is gospel music, corporate leadership, entrepreneurship, or any other demanding vocation. We want to believe we can have it all. We want to believe that dedication to our calling justifies sacrificing our closest relationships. But Guy's life testifies to a different truth. The work that seems most important is often less important than the work that seems mundane. The brutal reality is that Guy Penrod will never know how many marriages were saved, how many fathers chose presence over platform, how many ministry leaders restructured their lives because they witnessed his example. That impact is invisible and untrackable, but it's real. And it might be his most important legacy, more significant than any song he ever recorded or stage he ever commanded. He demonstrated that you can walk away from success when success is destroying what matters, that you can redefine winning, that you can choose faithfulness over fame. Guy once said something that summarizes his entire journey. The ministry won't last if the songs don't match your life. You have to live what you sing. This wasn't empty rhetoric. This was a man describing the painful process of bringing his life into alignment with his message, of discovering that the cost of integrity is often the cost of opportunity, of learning that the way down is sometimes the way up. So, what's the takeaway? If you're in a demanding career, if you feel the tension between success and family, if you've started to feel like a guest in your own home, Guy Penrod's story offers a radical alternative to the grind it out, sacrifice everything, success at any cost narrative that dominates our culture. It says that presence is a form of success that matters more than prominence, that the people who know you best should get your best, not your leftovers, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose a smaller stage and a fuller life.